The weekend the Cookie Queens documentary opened in cinemas, it sat below a cat video compilation on the domestic box office scoreboard. I want you to hold that image for a moment. A documentary executive produced by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, promoted across international press for weeks, positioned as a meaningful cultural contribution, and when the public chart came out, tracking every paid admission that opening weekend, it landed beneath 90 minutes of cats knocking things off tables. The campaign behind the film had already released a statement calling Cookie Queens a transformative project with unprecedented community engagement. Those words were chosen before the final weekend tally was even posted. Two stories about the same release, published within hours of each other. One written by the people who needed the project to succeed, the other generated automatically by the ticketing software that simply counted who walked through the door. By the end of this, you will know which of those success claims was defensible and which one quietly disappeared from the conversation once the numbers became undeniable. But understanding how that gap opened requires following the money, the memos, and the people whose professional futures were pinned to both versions of the truth. There is a person I keep thinking about in all of this, and she is not Harry or Meghan. She is the Sussex publicity consultant, the one whose job it was to shape the narrative around Cookie Queens regardless of what the weekend numbers showed. I do not know her exact name, I know her role. She is the person who drafts the impact narrative, the one who turns screening attendance into community engagement, who reframes modest ticket sales as targeted cultural reach. She needs every project in the Sussex portfolio to feel like forward motion, because the next deal depends entirely on reputational momentum. If Cookie Queens lands publicly as a commercial disappointment, her job becomes harder, not impossible. Harder. The next pitch meeting starts with someone across the table pulling up that box office chart and asking a question she cannot afford to answer honestly. Her career runs on the gap between what the numbers say and what the narrative says, and that gap has to stay manageable. On the other side of this story is the independent distributor. This is the company that controls whether Cookie Queens expands into additional cinemas after opening weekend. They decide whether to book more screens, extend the run, push it into mid-size markets. Their calculation is brutally simple. They look at paid admissions per screen, they compare that number to the cost of keeping the film booked in a given venue. If the number works, they expand. If it does not, they pull back. They do not read impact statements. They open a spreadsheet and the spreadsheet makes the decision. No malice, no agenda, arithmetic. Here is the relationship wound at the center of this entire story. The Cookie Queens project needed two things from the same release that do not naturally live together. It needed audiences to trust the mission, to believe this was a film about women entrepreneurs, about community, about something larger than celebrity. And simultaneously, it needed the commercial prestige that comes from a strong box office performance, because that credibility is what funds the next project, secures the next deal, and keeps the Sussex production brand viable in a market with a very short memory. The project was asking the public to value it for its heart, while privately asking the industry to value it for its numbers. The weekend that Scoreboard came out, with Cookie Queens sitting beneath a cat video compilation, both requests became very difficult to sustain. The heart story and the numbers story pulled in opposite directions, and the people standing in the middle had to choose which one to tell. The impact statement went out on Sunday afternoon. I want to be specific about the timing because it matters. The box office tracking services update their weekend estimates on Sunday evening. The final verified numbers post Monday morning. The campaign released its transformative cultural moment language before either of those updates was complete. Someone in a room the press was never invited into made a deliberate decision to get ahead of the scoreboard. I imagine that room. A conference call, 4 or 5 voices, phones on a polished table in a rented office suite with the blinds half drawn. Laptops open, someone saying we need to frame this before Monday, someone else saying the impact numbers are strong even if the ticket sales are modest. A third voice, quieter, asking whether releasing the statement before the chart posts will look defensive. A pause, the sound of someone setting down a coffee cup, then the senior voice saying publish it. The timeline is verifiable. Compare the timestamp on the press release to the timestamp on the chart update. The success narrative was in editors' inboxes before the failure narrative had finished being calculated. That sequencing was a choice. Monday morning, the distributor's booking manager opened her calendar. I picture her office as one of those narrow rooms with fluorescent lighting that buzzes faintly. a shared printer in the corner, 2 monitors showing different spreadsheet tabs. She had a list of expansion dates for Cookie Queens. Cinemas in secondary markets had tentatively agreed to screen the film starting week 2, provided the opening numbers supported the booking. She pulled up the weekend per screen average. She compared it to the threshold her company uses internally for expansion decisions. It was not close. And then, one by one, she began removing dates from the calendar. No phone call, no confrontation, no email. She simply opened each booking entry, highlighted it, deleted it, and moved to the next one. By 11 that morning, Cookie Queens had lost its expansion window. The film would continue on its original screens for the contractual run, but no new cinemas would be added. The rollout was frozen. Here is the first receipt. The public box office chart is not an opinion. It is not a review. It is not a tabloid spinning a narrative. It is a machine-generated ranking based on verified ticket sales reported by cinema chains to tracking services that have no stake in whether any particular film succeeds or fails. Cookie Queens appeared on that chart below a cat video compilation. That is the count. Now here is where the gap becomes a problem that actual people had to manage. The booking manager, the one who deleted those expansion dates, noticed something that genuinely stopped her. She had the campaign's impact statement open on one monitor and the booking chart open on the other. The impact statement described Cookie Queens as generating extraordinary audience connection and meaningful community response. The booking chart showed a per-screen average that would not have justified adding a single additional venue in any market. She was looking at 2 descriptions of the same weekend that could not both be accurate. One of them was the press release, the other was her job. She did not call a journalist. She mentioned it to a colleague over coffee, the way people do when something strikes them as odd enough to remark on, but not dramatic enough to escalate. But that moment, that quiet recognition of the distance between the campaign's language and the campaign's results, is the seed of everything that followed. Once the people who booked cinemas noticed that the narrative did not match the numbers, every future claim from the Sussex production team would be measured against that gap. Trust in the distribution business is not about whether someone likes your project, it is about whether your projections match your results. On that Monday morning, they did not match. They were not close. Within 48 hours of the expansion freeze, the campaign pivoted. I have seen this pattern before, and there is almost a choreography to it. First, the language shifts from theatrical success to cultural impact. Then the focus moves from public screenings to private ones. Then educational partnerships get announced. Each step moves the goalposts further from the one metric the industry actually uses to judge a theatrical release, which is how many people paid to walk into a cinema and watch it. The Cookie Queens team began arranging private screening events. Community organizations were invited, women's business groups, university programs in entrepreneurship and social enterprise. Some of these events were well attended and warmly received. People showed up, people engaged, people were moved by the stories of the women featured in the documentary. That part is real, and I will come back to it. But here is what the distributor saw when those announcements landed. She opened a desk drawer in that narrow office and pulled out a printed memo. The paper was slightly creased from being folded and unfolded because she had already shown it to 2 colleagues that week. This memo had been sent to exhibitors during the pre-release booking period, and the language in it was not about community impact, it was not about cultural contribution or women's empowerment, it was about commercial momentum. If this breakdown is useful, the like button helps this channel keep reaching people who want the fuller picture. Now stay with me, because what happened next is where this gets genuinely revealing. The expansion memo is the second receipt, and it changes the meaning of everything that came before. The memo promised exhibitors that Cookie Queens would deliver strong commercial performance by week 2, generating audience momentum that supports extended runs and additional screen bookings. That was the pitch used to convince cinema owners to set aside screens. Not impact, not mission, not cultural conversation, commercial performance, audience momentum, extended runs. That is sales language. That is the language of a product that expects to make money for the people who show it. The third receipt is the frozen booking sheet. The distributor kept it. The calendar with every deleted expansion date still visible as a strike through. Monday, struck through. Tuesday, struck through. Wednesday, through the following Sunday, each one struck through in the same methodical way, each line representing a cinema that had been promised commercial momentum and received instead a press release about community engagement. And then there is the witness. The booking manager picked up the phone that Tuesday afternoon and called a colleague at another distribution company. She did not call to gossip. She called to verify. She read the expansion memo's language over the phone and asked a single question. Did you get one of these too? The answer was yes. She confirmed that the original bookings had been made on the strength of the commercial language. And she confirmed that when the weekend numbers posted, those bookings were removed because the commercial promise had not been met. Not grudge, not agenda, the spreadsheet said no. I want to show you what each side did next, because that is where the story becomes something larger than a box office disappointment. The campaign continued releasing impact metrics, private screening attendance, social media engagement broken down by platform, partnership announcements with educational organizations. Each data point carefully selected to tell the story of a project succeeding on its own terms. Within that frame, some of those numbers were real. People did attend. Organizations did partner. The engagement was not fabricated. The distributor did nothing public. No statement, no contradiction, no leak. She simply did not book additional screens. That silence was her verdict, and it was louder than any press release because it directly affected whether anyone outside the original release cities could see Cookie Queens in a cinema. The campaign could claim whatever impact it wanted. The distributor controlled the doors, and the doors stayed closed. On Eyed Close to the Sussex operation described the internal mood that week as controlled frustration. Not panic, not despair. Frustration because the team believed in the project and felt the numbers did not reflect the actual audience experience. Opening weekend box office is a blunt instrument. It does not measure whether people cried in the screening room, whether someone bought the cookbook afterward, whether a woman in the third row recognized her own story on screen and called her business partner on the drive home. But it is the instrument the industry uses. That week, the instrument placed Cookie Queens below a compilation of cat videos on the public scoreboard. Place the expansion memo next to the impact narrative and read them side by side. This is where the story turns. The expansion memo told exhibitors that Cookie Queens would deliver commercial momentum. That was the promise used to secure screen bookings. The impact narrative told the press that Cookie Queens had delivered transformative cultural engagement. That was the story released to the public when the commercial momentum failed to materialize. Both documents came from the same campaign. Both described the same project. Both were sent with the authority of the same production team, and they cannot both be the primary definition of success for the same release. If commercial momentum was the real goal, then the pivot to impact language is damage control. If cultural impact was always the real goal, then the expansion memo misrepresented the project's intentions to the people who gave it cinema screens on the basis of a commercial promise. This is the midpoint where the meaning of the entire story shifts beneath your feet. The limited release was not an accident. Limited theatrical runs are a legitimate and often wise strategy for documentaries. Many excellent films play on a handful of screens, build word of mouth, and find their audience through streaming or educational licensing within months. There is nothing inherently wrong with a modest theatrical footprint, but the expansion memo reveals that a limited release was not the only strategy being communicated. The campaign was simultaneously telling exhibitors to expect commercial growth while telling the press to judge the film by its mission. Two definitions of success sold to two different audiences at the same time. And when the weekend numbers came in, the campaign chose to publicize the definition that made the results look better and quietly retire the one that did not. That is not a box office disappointment, that is a credibility problem. The cost of a credibility problem in the entertainment industry is not immediate. It does not show up on the weekend chart. It shows up the next time you walk into a room and need someone to trust your projections. It shows up when the next project needs distribution and the person across the table remembers that the last set of numbers you promised did not arrive. Under the cover of both things being true, let me say this directly. The currency being spent here is not money. The currency is reliability. And reliability, once spent, is extraordinarily expensive to earn back. A senior entertainment journalist, someone who has covered theatrical distribution for more than 20 years, described the Cookie Queens rollout as a case study in what happens when you pitch one story to the trade and another to the public, and the internet puts them side by side before you can control the sequence. That framing is harsher than mine, but I cannot argue with the structural observation. The two stories existed, they were sent to different audiences, and when the numbers arrived, only one of them survived contact with reality. The verdict, if I have to compress it into a single sentence, is this. The Cookie Queens campaign did not fail because the documentary was bad or because the mission was hollow. It failed because the campaign promised two incompatible outcomes to two different groups of people and was caught in the gap between them when the weekend chart posted and a cat video compilation was sitting one line higher on the public scoreboard. I keep coming back to a specific image from that Monday morning. The booking manager in her narrow office, two monitors, one showing the impact statement with its language about transformation and unprecedented community engagement. The other showing the expansion calendar with every new date deleted. She is not angry, she is not gleeful, she is just doing her job, which is matching projections to results and acting on the difference. And in that quiet act of deleting bookings, she delivered a verdict that no press release could override. Now give the other reading its strongest case. Picture one of those private screenings after the theatrical rollout froze. The lights come up. A woman in the third row stays seated for a moment because one of the entrepreneurs on screen has described a setback that feels exactly like her own. In the lobby, a university coordinator asks about an educational license. A community organizer takes a stack of cards for the next event. None of that appears on the weekend chart. Streaming, festival play, classroom use, and community screenings can carry a documentary far beyond a modest theatrical opening. A film can fail commercially and still matter deeply to the people it reaches. That is the strongest defense of Cookie Queens, and it deserves to stand. The mission value does not vanish because the ticket count disappointed. But the defense meets a hard limit when the booking manager unfolds the original memo again. It does not promise only awareness, education, or a carefully limited mission-first run. It promises commercial momentum, audience growth, extended runs, and additional screens. Those words were sent to exhibitors whose cooperation depended on them. If mission impact had been the only measure from the beginning, the public scoreboard would be incomplete rather than devastating. The campaign invited a commercial judgment first and tried to retire it after the result arrived. The mission may remain sincere, the commercial promise still failed. Both truths can stand, but one cannot erase the other. So let me return to where we started. The weekend scoreboard, Cookie Queens below, the cat video compilation. I have spent this entire time walking through the memos, the bookings, the deleted expansion dates, and the two incompatible success stories that emerged from the same campaign, and I want to give the generous reading its full weight before I finish. I want to be fair here. Harry and Meghan entered the documentary space with what appears to be a genuine interest in this particular subject. Cookie Queens was not a vanity project in the way that some celebrity-produced content clearly is. There was research, there was real engagement with real communities. There were real women whose stories were told with care and specificity and respect. That matters. I do not believe the mission was entirely performative, and I think dismissing it as nothing more than a brand exercise would be both inaccurate and unfair. There is my concession, and I mean every word of it. Now place the central uncomfortable fact beside it. The same campaign that produced that genuine mission work also sent a memo to exhibitors promising commercial momentum by week 2. The same team that later organised community screenings and educational partnerships had previously secured those cinema bookings by telling venue managers that audiences would show up in numbers that justified the screen space. When the audiences did not arrive in those numbers, the campaign pivoted to impact language. The mission became the primary measure of success, and the commercial promise was quietly folded up and tucked away as though it had never been written on headed paper and sent to people who made business decisions based on its contents. Both readings can stand side by side. The generous reading says this was a well-intentioned project that the theatrical market simply was not ready to support at the level the campaign hoped. The less generous reading says this was a project that overpromised to distributors and re-narrated its own results when the numbers disappointed. I genuinely believe elements of both are true. The intentions were real, the overpromise was also real, and the gap between them is where the credibility cost lives, quietly accumulating interest that will come due the next time the Sussex production team needs someone in the industry to trust a projection. Here is my closing image, and it is the one I have not been able to stop thinking about since I started pulling this story apart. Picture the booking board in the distributor's office. The expansion dates are gone. Every single one of them erased, struck through, deleted from the calendar. The screens that might have played Cookie Queens in week 2 and week 3 are now booked with other films. And pinned beside that board, because someone printed it out and fixed it there with a single thumbtack, is the campaign's impact statement. Transformative cultural moment, unprecedented community engagement. The words are right there on the wall, next to the empty calendar where the expansion dates used to be. Nobody has taken the printout down. Nobody has added the dates back. They just exist together now, the claim and the consequence, hanging side by side on the same wall in a narrow office where someone quietly did the math and let the math make the decision. That scoreboard, the one that placed Cookie Queens below a compilation of cats, is still the last word in the room. No press release has overwritten it, no impact statement has amended it. It simply is what it is. So here is where I leave it with you. Was the Cookie Queens campaign genuinely dishonest, or was it simply optimistic in the way that every production campaign is optimistic, stretching projections further